thank you for joining us. My name is Robin. I'm the Independent Policing Officer for the City of Madison's Office of the Independent Monitor. I'll let Greg introduce himself, but first I just want to say that this is really nice, and this is actually like what I wanted to see, like when I started this job, was like members of the community showing like a real interest in what the office is doing and what policing in this city can look like, and getting involved and coming in and buying in. I really appreciate this, and I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here. Great.
Hi, I'm Greg. I'm the data analyst for the Office of the Independent Monitor. And again, thank you all for being here. We're very open to all forms of feedback. If you've got things that occur to you and constructive criticism, all of that we'd be very happy to hear. I'm a scientist. My primary background is actually in evolutionary biology, genomics, but I began working and doing data analysis regarding police reform after an unarmed neighbor of mine, Paula Heenan, was killed in an officer-involved shooting. Ultimately, that brought me here. So thank you all for being here.
So I'll start us off right at the front here. So this has been a long time coming. The Office of the Independent Monitor had its first full-time employee, myself, at the end of 22, I believe it was December 22. So this first annual report that is coming out is to encapsulate the work that was done in the last 2 years. Rather than, essentially just being an empty report, for 1 year and saying like, hey, we're still working on it. I want to make sure that we're giving the public a full picture of, the full idea. What it is that the office is going to do, what the role of the office is, as well as the role of the community and the Police Civilian Oversight Board. This is a brand new kind of monitoring structure within the state. So we're on uncharted ground right now, and sorry, this thing kind of keeps going out. And I just...
We can hear you pretty good. I think actually it sounds better without the microphone.
And I just want to say though that, as far as what we're building here, we need everyone to be involved. We need the members of the community that feel like they don't have a voice to come in and visit us, because we want to be their voice. We want to facilitate them being heard, and we want to facilitate change happening. And the only way that that happens is through a systemic model, and that's what this office and the board is to do. So without further ado, let's dive into our first annual report. So as I mentioned before, this is a pretty unique model. Across the country, civilian oversight models tend to be spread up into one of two different types, whether it's a board led or a committee that's doing the oversight, or an independent auditor. What we have is both. And this allows for far more engagement with the public, as well as like a better understanding of where the public is coming from, what its understanding is, and what its expectations are. And then to have the independent auditor position to actually enforce those desires of the public, to advance the policy recommendations that are being brought up in a committee. But also the additional thing, because we just keep being unique, we also have subpoena power. And this is a scary sounding thing until it's not. Essentially what it is it's the ability to keep the process rolling in the event of some kind of pushback. When things start to, communication breaks down between the community and the city, the office seeks to be that icebreaker to essentially like cut through the bureaucracy with our subpoena power in order to get the information that is needed to be understood. That being said, subpoena power is like not necessarily a high priority for us. That is, kind of a thing that we turn to if communication breaks down. And so far, in my 2 years here, communication has been very, very good between the office, the board, and MPD. After our memorandum of understanding was signed at the beginning of 24, we set to work on continuing to work between the administration at MPD as well as the board to determine what would be the best complaint process that honors what the board had come up together, but would also recognize the work that's being done at MPD and not trying to throw a monkey wrench into the gears of their machine, because if we end up breaking them, then not a very good oversight model, is it? So, with that being said, the primary goal of any kind of oversight model is to bring accountability, but also to bring change. So the method, and again, that I just want to specify, the method of change that this board and this office can bring can only come through community engagement. And Greg, I know that you've got some additional items here.
Oh yeah, a couple other things I'll add. Subpoena power, actually, it's not most important within the city. Where it's really useful is, say that a store has video of events and the complaint is being investigated. That's really where it's more predominantly used in police oversight agencies. And I'll also, one critical thing here is we are a monitor type oversight mechanism. That's very different from many oversight mechanisms that are entirely or predominantly just complaint focused. Individual case disciplinary focus really has its limitations. Often things are actually quite systemic in nature. Edward Deming, who's revered as the father of the quality movement, made the point that the majority of cases of low quality product problems are actually the result of the system and not the result of individual members of the workforce. So even though often the instinct is, to blame a particular individual and, to see that as the problem, well, that individual may be doing what they did because they're part of a larger system, and rectifying or improving things in the system have a lot of power to bring about better outcomes.
And moving on with systems. Oh, sorry, back one.
Yep.
There we go. So let's use this as an example. This was one I came up with for the annual report, so I just copy pasted and it's very silly. But I'm just gonna run through it real fast. But say you go to a restaurant and you read sandwich on a menu. You order a sandwich from the waiter. Later, you are confused to find the waiter has brought you a soup. Now, there can be an investigation into whether the waiter was listening, or whether you misread the item you ordered, or whether the menu itself was poorly communicated the nature of the dish. However, if this is a misunderstanding that happens over and over across different waiters and different confused diners, then we know there is a deeper problem going on. This is what systemic issues are. And this is how we can find them. Rather than the error being the fault of just one bad waiter, perhaps the waiters are being trained differently than the diners expect. Perhaps sandwich is actually a term of art that the waiters at this restaurant understand to mean soup. Whatever the cause, the restaurant needs to find a lasting solution. Firing all the waiters or chastising the diners is not going to resolve it. And instead, somebody has to look at the menu a bit closer, talk to the diners, and talk to the waiters, and determine if there's a problem with the menu, what the diner thinks the menu says, and what the waiter thinks a sandwich is. So, that was a very silly metaphor. Let's bring it home. So essentially what we are looking for in this office is we're trying to find systemic solutions to systemic problems, but we're identifying individual incidents. Because ultimately, Madison is not, New York. It is a rather small town. So as far as our cohesiveness as a community, there's a lot of opportunity here to actually have that interpersonal connection to reform within Madison. And what we're seeing, and the method that I'm aiming to implement here, is by looking to see what PSNIA, or sorry, professional standards in internal affairs investigations are sustained, or excuse me, are exonerated, the officer being exonerated. If we can find that these are consistently happening across a consistent policy, then that indicates a miscommunication between the police department's standard operating procedure and the community's understanding of that standard operating procedure. Otherwise, they wouldn't be filing a complaint. If they thought that everything went according to the procedure and how they want to see policing their city, they wouldn't be complaining. And them being told, no, actually it's all within procedure, isn't really, that's cold comfort to people that have, suffered. So, the solution is always going to be the remedy here. We have to provide a solution to the public. We have to provide a solution to these people so that even if if they're understanding, okay, there's no procedural disciplinary way that I can get justice here, but that I can instead get justice by changing the system that led to the injustice. And that is what this office intends to do. That's why our independence is so paramount. We can't be in the pocket of like any particular party within local governance. We have to stay independent so that the public can trust us to recognize that when you come into the office, there's only 3 of us. So you're going to look us in the eye, we're going to look you in the eye, and we're going to work out what it is that happened, what caused that, and how we can change that. Do you have anything to add, or we can move on to the effective oversight?
I'll just add one thing. One thing Madison is famous for is where, this is the location where problem-oriented policing was first implemented. And what we're doing is a bit analogous to problem-oriented policing. Problem-oriented policing, there's less emphasis on enforcement, like doing standard law enforcement, and more emphasis on thinking through, seeing it as problems, conceptualizing the problems, thinking through solutions, and generating a reduction in offenses, not as much through enforcement as through redesign.
So how does this work? Essentially, like as Greg and I have already stated now, the idea is that with the investigations of these individual complaints, these individual intakes, I should say, because not all of them are going to turn into a complaint. But this public input, it allows us to investigate particular incidents, and rather than essentially playing whack-a-mole with individual problem, bad apples, if you will, instead we're trying to find the thing within the system that leads to bad apples. We're trying to find the way to close the gaps in the system that bad apples move through. We're trying to find a way that we don't even need to worry about the bunch being worried because it's under community oversight. Because the community is determining, it is the quality assurance, and it is determining whether or not policing in its city is the way that it wants it to be. So, complaints lead to us, we do our investigations, and these investigations also can lead to enduring monitoring pattern and practice analysis. Essentially, if we're getting complaints, let's say, about use of force, these investigations at PSNIA are being exonerated. So we're seeing there's a misunderstanding between the public's understanding of what use of force and proper police use of force in Madison should look like, and what the standard operating procedure actually says. So we can look at that for a policy analysis, but let's say that the policy is good. We all agree on the policy. So what's the problem? Well, that's where the pattern and practice analysis comes in. It's guided by this individual input from individual intakes, but that leads us to then have the jumping off point to monitor the actual system that's leading to that increased amount of use of force complaints that are then being sustained, or exonerated, excuse me. So, with that in mind, I'm gonna defer to Greg as far as some of the monitoring, like data analysis that we have planned out for the year. I know that that's gonna come up a little bit later in the slideshow here, but I just wanna give it a little teaser for that. So, the main thing about OIM and PCOB as far as like our creation has been a lot of confusion as far as like where we fall within the municipal structure. You know, there was a lot of, you know, questioning, well, we already have the Police and Fire Commission, what is the OIM? Or we have Professional Standard in Internal Affairs, what is OIM? And OIM seeks to be the connection between the disciplinary process that is in interpreting and enforcing policies and this whole process is, you know, removed from the public. It's done in commission hearings, it's done in investigations within the police department, it's done within, you know, without the public engagement. So our job is to be that public engagement in those investigations. Specifically after the fact, okay, we have the investigation, it's concluded, here's this, what the city's finding is. Well, how does the community feel about that? Like, does it feel that the investigation was done correctly, that it was done thoroughly? Does it need to be reopened? Let's say that all of that has been done. All right, investigation's great, but what does this tell us if we are still seeing people getting hurt? If we're still seeing people's rights being trampled on, we want to make sure the Madison Police Department, the City of Madison, the Office of the Independent Monitor, all of us, we want to make sure that that isn't happening. We want to make sure that people's rights are respected, and that when they are disrespected, that there is a method to actually enforce such a system that ensures that those rights would be respected. So, following this flow chart, let me just go through the flow chart here. So, normally what people understand as far as the police disciplinary procedure is they file with Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs does an investigation, and then they basically get an answer, yes or no. And that is, that's only like one sliver of, like, honestly, the procedure that happens. What happens after PSNIA finishes their investigation is they bring their findings to the chief. The chief then reviews those findings and makes a disciplinary recommendation to FPC if, you know, the findings are showing, you know, somebody did violate policy. Now that disciplinary recommendation is sent to PFC. PFC is the one that then signs off on any kind of disciplinary decision. We are not involved in any of that process. They are not going to come to us and ask, like, hey, what do you think this particular officer should get for this particular incident? Because that's not our job. And what our job is to analyze the policy that they are being analyzed under, essentially the law itself. Now, what we do though is that we're not like a undemocratic system here. Like, we don't actually have the ability to implement any of those kind of policy recommendations. That is reserved for the Common Council. So this is really where OIM and PCOB is a bridge, not necessarily like a wall. Things move through us, and we build them, and we ensure that everyone's voices are heard before it goes to the Common Council, so that the Common Council gets an informed and holistic idea of like what the concerns are of the community, as well as what the policy recommendations are of both the board and the office. Then the council can change said policies. MPD can change such policies. All of these things then flow downstream from that. But I just want to really make clear, because this was a point of confusion for a couple of years, we are not a disciplinary body. We are not like going to be the cop firing office. That it doesn't serve the purpose of the office to essentially, like as I said before, play whack-a-mole. We're looking for systemic ideas. This is auditing data, just in general, arbitrary application of best practices towards what the public's expectation is of best practices. Essentially finding the happy medium between them. Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, as Robin just articulated, our primary role is to influence policy, to bring about systemic change, as opposed to a disciplinary function. We have no direct disciplinary powers. We do have some indirect disciplinary influence, like for example, say somebody comes to us with a complaint, and then we investigate. That may, the facts uncovered in that investigation may influence the disciplinary decisions of the chief or the PFC. And the independent monitor has the power to appoint an attorney if somebody comes with a complaint that has arguable merit, to be able to go before the PFC and to level the playing field. But we don't have any direct disciplinary power.
So let's move through essentially what the system that we have is. First, I'm going to distinguish here real fast intakes and complaints, because this is going to get kind of nuanced and I just want to get out ahead of this. Every complaint is an intake, not every intake is a complaint. Essentially, an intake is just going to be the terminology I'm using for somebody that is coming into the office and they do not have an ongoing investigation by the office. That is a complaint. We investigate complaints. We process intakes. So, an intake is just anybody has anything to say, red, green, or purple about the police department. They come into the office and they can either fill out a form there, they can fill it out online and email it to us, they can call us and we'll fill it out over the phone. We want to be available to the public and to meet them where they're at. So next is going to be an initial screening. Basically, if they submitted their complaint like in writing, like through email, first thing we have to do is to look to see if there's anything that we still need as far as that intake in order to determine whether it could qualify as a complete complaint. Complete enough, this has to be done because statutorily we need to let PSNIA know if there is police misconduct that they need to open an investigation into. So it's early on, we're looking to see if this is a complete complaint so that we could then submit to PSNIA. After we have confirmed all the different details of the intake and any pending extrapolatory factors such as like degradation of evidence, memory, just making sure that we've got statements done as quickly as possible and as soon as possible, basically the preservation of the issue. Then it goes into the complaint selection queue. That we currently only have one investigator, that's me. So at the moment, like I don't have staff to handle like a ton of concurrent investigations. I am setting a personal goal of 3 concurrent investigations at a time. Right now I'm running 2 and that's on its own, is pretty tough. So I'm getting better though, I feel. Now, after your intake then moves to the top of the complaint selection queue, you'll have your first meeting with me, the monitor, where we discuss that incident and possible solutions. Now, when I say possible solutions, I'm asking the intake. They come in and they have, what they feel went wrong, but as far as like what can actually be done about that, I want to start by always centering what their expectations are. Because I can give them a menu of like, hey, I can write a letter, or we can open an investigation, I can do a press release, so on and so forth. But if all they want is an apology, then we're spending a lot of time dehumanizing the intake rather than actually recognizing the beating heart behind that. So when we're in your first meeting with me, or with the independent monitor, we will always be focusing on specifically what is the solution that you want to see and how close can we get there, but more importantly, what can we do to make sure that whatever happened doesn't happen again. So the second meeting is to determine whether or not an investigation will be opened and what the OIM's next actions are going to be. So taking from what the public's input is, what it is that they want to see happen. The second meeting is to go over essentially some strategized ideas of like what it is that we're going to be doing if there's an investigation. Like I said, I keep saying if there's an investigation, it's because, you know, if it's an intake saying, I have a concern about a specific policy that MPD has, that's not a complaint because I don't have a officer to identify and say like this officer did a thing, I need to send that to PSNIA. It's not necessarily a complaint, that's an intake. However, because of the uniqueness of our office and what I was saying before about these incidents leading to pattern and practice analysis, we can still open an investigation into that policy. Not necessarily a particular incident of misconduct, but a broader policy itself. That is backed up then with data analysis by Greg, and we look at this as a auditing of a system rather than any kind of individual officer. Now, with the third meeting and so on, it is not uncommon to meet several times before there is a before there is a consensus on what it is that we need to what we need to do and what it is that even happened. In fact, the first step of writing up any kind of investigative report is going to be going over just the fact summary. Like before we even get to any of the questions that I'll be investigating and contacting MPD or any of that, honestly, the first step is always going to be working with the member of the public that they feel confident that the final version, the section of the report that explains this is what happened, is reflecting what it is that they said, what it is that they experienced, and if there's any variation between what it is that they saw, what it is that they experienced, and what policies may be, or what other evidence may show, that shows up later. It starts with a clear and straightforward presentation of what that person's experience was as told by them. And that's also pretty unique because normally in the way that these kind of investigations are done within like internal affairs, for example, it's far more focused on, all right, what is the inarguable facts that we can find and what is the evidence support as far as like everything there, and then we leave the gaps and we just kind of like investigate to see what is the most likely as far as happened there. I'm doing this backwards. I want to do this with first starting with where the public is coming in, they say X, Y, and Z happened, and whether or not Y happened, I can still investigate X and Z. So that's my thought process there. Now, once we have this fact summary put together, we have a clear idea of what this member of the public witnessed or is experiencing, or what it is that they brought to the office. We then start to talk about questions, what it is that the office can actually look into. This is going to be a case-by-case basis, so it's a little bit difficult to put it into flow chart here, but essentially it's going to be, again, guided by the member of the public that brought this in. There's no real benefit if I essentially like take over an investigation and say, this is the real question here. What is the question that needs to be answered is the question that's being asked. And that's what this step is for. So in law school, the way that we like brief cases is that we always have the fact summary, then the issue of law, essentially that the court is deciding. This is that section right there. What is the point of the investigation is answered here. Next step is the investigation. We could be here all day going through investigative procedures, but let's just move on to the next items because that's where the public is involved. Go ahead to the next slide.
I wanted to add that one of the most important steps is figuring out jurisdiction. if the incident actually is something that the OIM has the ability to investigate or weigh in on, because if it happened outside of MPD's jurisdiction, then they can't investigate.
Yeah.
It's also important, you know, for example, let's say something happens once someone has gone to the jail, that person is no longer in MPD custody, they're now in the sheriff's custody. And so that too, again, jurisdiction. So a lot of times we'll have people out, I've had people out in the community ask if this is something that the OIM can investigate, and because it's something that has happened within the jail, it's not something usually that OIM would have the ability to investigate.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Shadera.
Yeah.
In fact, that's one of the items that would be, tackled in our very first meeting, because there are a vast number of different law enforcement agencies, and we only have authority over one. So if they were pulled over by the sheriff's office and their complaint is with the sheriff's office, we have no say over that. But that's still a person that came in and needs help. So at the very least, like, what we do then is we try and connect them with the procedure and the process that can actually get them what they need within their correct jurisdiction. But beyond that, like, we can't really go further. However, again, this information is still important to us, because it's like, if we're getting information about, like, for example, Dane County Sheriff is doing a lot of things that people are thinking is Madison Police Department, so they're yelling at Madison Police Department about this, nothing's going to change with Dane County Sheriff. So in order to facilitate change, we have to make sure that the complaints are going to the right places as well.
One last point. This is not the first annual report. This is the first presentation of the annual report, but there is actually a 21-22 annual report somewhere. So.
Sorry, for the office.
Yes.
This is the office's first one. Okay, so after I've completed my investigation, I'm going to then come to another meeting with the intake, and I'm going to lay out my draft report with them. Essentially, this is, again, trying to have the public be the quality assurance here of the office. Before I declare that an investigation is closed, they get the chance to look through it and see if there's anything I missed. Essentially, monitoring the monitor. And if there's additional investigation that comes from that, then so be it. After that investigation is complete, the report is finished, and everything is essentially getting ready now for publication. The next step is going to be privacy redactions. So there's a lot of information that is contained within police records that is statutorily barred from disclosure to the public. Things like juvenile records, for example, medical records, so on and so forth. Those kind of things are out of my hands. By law, they have to be redacted. However, there's also additional things that can be considered for the privacy of the person that is bringing forth an intake that leads to an investigation. Again, this is not a disciplinary body, so we're not owed any kind of like due process rights to a member of MPD that their conduct led to this investigation, because we're not investigating that officer. We're investigating the conduct. We're investigating the policy that led to the conduct, the training that led to the conduct, and the solutions that make sure that conduct doesn't happen again. So as a result of that, if there are any additional concerns that might arise from like the details that would be released in the report, we let the intake guide that discussion as far as their own individual information. I don't want anyone to come to this office with an intake, have us investigate it, and then they be harassed for years after. That's not the goal of this office. The goal of the office is to be the exact opposite of that, to be a safe place for the community to come and to share as much or as little of their identity in order to get justice. That being said, there's also going to be a ton of law enforcement sensitive information that will be present within some of these reports. Things like NIBIN's reports or gun tracing, so on and so forth. That information ultimately, especially when these are records that are received from MPD, MPD retains its custodial rights over its records, and as such makes the decision as far as like specific items within its records that I'm releasing, where those redactions may be. That being said, my summary is separate from that. It's a separate record. So they will review my report, essentially summarizing these items, as well as the documents that are redacted. That way we make sure that any law enforcement sensitive information is protected, but also it allows MPD to provide a response to the conclusion of the report that can then be included in the report's index. My goal here is to have these reports and these investigations be as cumulative as possible. Nothing is more annoying than trying to follow a story across 17 different writings. I really want to make sure that like what this office provides to the city is in many cases closure. We have the full story of what happened. We have the responses to the questions. We have all of the issues saved in time so that we don't have to relitigate the same question over and over and over again in the future. We have it in one easy document at the perspective of the police department, the perspective of the intake, the perspective of the community, the perspective of the Office of the Independent Monitor. So with that all being said, we'll have two versions of the report, then most likely, because one version will have some redactions to it, that's going to be maintained by the office and would be available to future legal actions or before the Police and Fire Commission. But another version that has these redactions applied would then be published online. That report is then presented to the PCOB, and finally, the intake subject would be invited to discuss their experience with the PCOB in closed session. I mentioned before monitoring the monitor. This is where some teeth to that into that promise. Essentially, if they feel I did a terrible job, I want them to tell my boss. And I want them to tell my boss in a way that is safe and private and allows them to be forthright. So that's where this process ends. This process ends with the member of the community talking to representatives of the community about how they feel about the office and the board and the process that they just went through. If there's something that needs to change, we have to change it. And I don't think that we have to wait, for several different investigations to find the patterns of where I could be doing better. I think that that's something that we can determine every single investigation. So at the very least, I will always make sure that we're inviting the intake subject to actually discuss the process with the PCOB after the fact. And hopefully that creates a feedback loop in which I'm just consistently getting better at this and continuing to build a system that survives me, so that after I leave, I'm leaving in place a tried and true system that the community has already tested and approves of. And if there's any additional aspects that need to be tweaked, those get tweaked immediately. We don't need to wait year by year before the policies change. We're small, 3-person office. We can do this pretty easily. Bob and weave. Greg, do you have anything to add to the plan process?
Nope.
Okay. So then we'll move on to the recommendations. So this year's annual report, we had several recommendations listed in here. We're gonna take turns going through some of these. So I think the first one is Sid B, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just let you take it from here.
a quick moment for question before we?
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
definitely,
Okay.
definitely.
Thank you. So, Robin, I heard you say, that the end result would be if there are any concerns about the OIM rule. And I guess my question would be for members of the public who the end result wouldn't be a change in what you're doing, but wanting to see that change in policy. And so on that flow chart, I think the part that was missing for me and perhaps I misunderstood was, where does that then tie back into policy change, common council, where, so that it doesn't just land as a file that perhaps someone looks at and all of your hard work, sits there for perpetuity. How do we take what we saw on the screen and then make that into like a tangible action of change?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry. That is
And
probably the
maybe
most
you
important
mentioned it,
question to
I
this
might
all.
have missed it, so.
It's that would all be listed within the report. So the final version of the report, after I've gone through the investigation, I'm discussing this with the intake, essentially to determine if additional investigation needs to be done. It includes recommendations, policy recommendations that are coming from that investigation. So let's say the investigation is to squad cars are parking too far away from the curb and it's blocking traffic. So I do an investigation, I come to them and I say, all right, here's what I found. I found that on average, squad cars are parked 12 inches from the curb. Is this annoying? Maybe. Is it legal? Yes. Is there a recommendation that can be made? Recommendations say that they need to park 6 inches next to the curb. That can be included then in the report, but it's also, again, being checked by the subject of the investigation itself. So it's like, before this goes to the PCOB and I say like, hey, here's what I'm recommending in solution, or as a solution to this problem that we identified here, the member of the public is also guiding that as well. And so as far as like what it is that I'm presenting, I'm not just speaking on like from my own perspective, I'm also speaking on their behalf as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There is one component I just want to ask about. About 4 slides back, you had the flow chart with the city. It might be more than that. Yeah. So interesting. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, and I appreciate it because it shows the direct line of the OIM and PCOB and what's going on the outside. The thing that I would love to see in this is the community response. So like between the PSIA, which is very much a part of either having policies get passed by the council or not. It's very much a part of that, right? Like whether people want that or not. So just where's the community involvement in the flow chart? That's what I was wondering about, like, because you are doing the work of having listening sessions and you're doing the work of community engagement. And so I feel like that work should be represented in the flow chart. That's all.
Yeah, unfortunately, like I was trying to like keep it. I threw a lot of different government agencies into this flow chart all at once.
Yes, and not
So
a
it's like,
criticism at all.
yeah.
It's just that
I just wanted to specify that like where that is
Yeah.
that's. I was hoping to kind of capture the PCOB like next to the OIM.
Yeah,
But
and
like I
it's,
mean,
yeah,
I
it's
just
more.
wanted to
It's a
clarify.
component that you do, and so that's why I just thought it would be great to see it up there because it is work that you're doing, and it is a big part of the process of getting something passed or not. You know, so anyway, not a criticism
Okay.
at all.
No. I always appreciate ways that I can communicate better. I can only speak. I can't really hear myself.
And yeah, you can't do
Can
that.
I jump in with
Yeah.
the obvious question? Probably, what does PCOB stand for?
Police Civilian Oversight Board.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Who is, I have another probably obvious question. Who is the Professional Standards Internal Affairs? Where do they come from?
The PSNIA is a separate division within MPD. So these are MPD employees that do the internal investigation, and they bring that investigation to the chief. The chief then makes a disciplinary decision one way or the other, and that decision is then approved of by FPC or PFC.
Last question for me. Do we want to take a little break at 2:15, like a 5-minute break, and then come back to finish up,
Sure.
or do you want to just?
Do you want to go through the CID recommendation first?
Yeah, you've got, I mean, it'd be 15 minutes from now. I
Yeah,
just thought.
like I'll do the first set of recommendations.
Okay.
And then we can take a short break.
Okay, that's good.
Any more questions or comments on the first set of slides?
Well, I have one, but I don't know. It was when Shadera brought up about jurisdiction, like if something happened with an MPD officer, but let's say they're helping Fitchburg, but the resident was from Madison, that would still be jurisdiction, right, for you to look into?
So it depends on like what the intake is specifically concerned about. If they're concerned about, like, for example, like the conduct that like the sheriff's office did, MPD was there, but you know, if the conduct is the primary concern. If the conduct wasn't done by an MPD staff member, then we don't have any jurisdiction over that, because it would, what we would be investigating would be the policies that the sheriff's office had operated under, and that's outside of our jurisdiction. So what we can focus on, though, is we can also look at mutual aid as far as between different law enforcement agencies. If there's, for example, a problematic association between like one law enforcement agency and Madison Police Department, then that's also an area that we can look into. I mean, because it's directly involved in the operations of the Madison Police Department. So by extension, we can see essentially like what the connection there is, like what Madison's involvement is within such a problematic situation. But as far as any kind of recommendations, they would only be limited to that association, not necessarily the conduct of a separate administration or a separate agency. Does that make sense? I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
know that
that's
was
helpful.
a bit rattly.
No, it's good, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Any further questions? Okay, moving on to recommendations. So the first recommendation is situational decision-making training. And the recommendation is for, and it's often referred to as SIT-D training. And the recommendation is for all MPD officers to receive this training. And then following the initial training, officers should receive annual refresher trainings. This is a training that was developed by the University of Chicago Crime Lab, working in cooperation with the Chicago Police Department. It's a behavioral science informed training. And it is designed to help officer decision making in ambiguous, high stress situations, which often do occur in policing. The effects of SIT-D training were evaluated in a rigorous randomized controlled trial involving 2,070 Chicago Police Department officers. And like this essentially provides gold standard evidence because of the quality of the trial, the size of the trial, the construction of the trial. The training uses a combination of lectures, discussion, and simulator exercises. And on the right-hand part of this slide, you can see the project leads, the people who are involved in developing this training. And it really, in some ways, is revolutionary. So the origins of the OIM recommendation. We've been talking about how complaints can influence us and cause us to generate recommendations. And that's the case here. So I was reading through a number of complaints and complaint investigations that included information that was released to the leaders through open records requests. And it also included things like there was an incident at Willoughby's Cafe that received a lot of social media attention, and there was an article on Madison 365. So I was reading through all of these, and it became clear to me that often these suboptimal outcomes appear to be the result of cognitive distortions or thinking traps. These are things that all people are subject to. Everyone has certain thinking traps that they tend to fall into. And you know, I thought, okay, so this looks like it's driving at least a substantial part of the suboptimal outcomes. What could be done to mitigate this? I began looking around, and that's when I discovered SIT-D training. So it's training content specifically designed to help officers navigate high-stakes situations that are ambiguous, difficult, and officers in these situations optimally need to think proactively and consider multiple alternative possibilities. City training, provides tools to officers to do that and to allow them to become better at considering potential alternative interpretations of a situation before they settle too quickly on, a particular interpretation and course of action. And at the bottom, you see two of the individuals involved in developing the training. And as one of them actually points out, and I'll get into this in just a second, that also appears to have beneficial impacts on racial bias in policing. Okay, so the key principles of city training teaches officers to recognize and understand their own triggers, teaches officers to better self-regulate, like through breathing techniques and stuff that will reduce stress. It teaches officers to recognize these thinking traps that I was just referring to, that can cloud like rational judgment. And it teaches officers to think of alternative interpretations of events. And officers learn about a whole series of different cognitive biases. That includes, for example, catastrophizing, where you go quickly to the worst case possible scenario, assuming the worst outcome will happen. Another example is personalization, where you think that other people's actions are meant to antagonize you. Another example is all or none of thinking in terms of absolutes and not recognizing nuances. So they learn about all these potential thinking traps, and the results of the randomized controlled trial showed very substantial beneficial impacts. So city trained officers were 23% less likely to use force. That is a very substantial reduction. It also led to a 23% reduction in discretionary arrests. And by discretionary arrests, I mean things like disorderly conduct, where we have more minor offenses where the arrest may be unnecessary and doesn't hold as much public safety value. It reduced arrests of Black individuals by 11%, so showing potential to reduce the racial disparities that occur in policing. And it also led to drastically lower rate of officer injuries, a 49% reduction in days off that officers had to take due to injuries. The cost savings from that alone more than offsets the cost of the training. Officers who completed the training reported greater confidence and demonstrated changes in how they regulate emotions and strategies they use to cope with stress. And it appeared that the officers really liked this training and saw its utility. I'll mention that it could also be viewed as complementary to something that NPD has recently implemented, ICAP training, Integrated Communications Assessment and Tactics training, that was developed by the Police Executive Research Forum. And NPD implemented this. It was one of the recommendations of the NPD Policy Procedure Review Ad Hoc Committee. And police departments are now moving to implement both. Like, for example, the Ohio Blue Ribbon Task Force that was ordered to try to develop updated training for officers, for all Ohio officers, suggests that both should be utilized. And when officers are going through the academy, in the basic training, teaching them ICAT, in advanced training, having them do SIP-D training. Another recommendation that we have is to expand restorative justice diversion programs. The recommendation is to greatly expand such programs, including expanding them to additional offenses, including lower level felonies, inclusive of violent offenses, and to a much wider age range. There have now been a lot of studies on restorative justice diversion programs, and they show very strong beneficial effects. The effects are greatest in certain subgroups. Younger people show greater effects. People who have not been arrested before and processed through a criminal justice system show very substantial effects, even if they're older. Like often, this is thought of as something that is appropriate only for something very minimal, like for a citation. But studies are actually finding that people who commit lower level felonies, the rate of recidivism is drastically reduced, given this kind of diversion. So it shows, societal benefits across a wide spectrum of cases. And you can imagine this occurs for a number of reasons. First of all, when somebody's processed through the criminal justice system, there's stigmatization. You have a criminal record, makes it more difficult to get employment. You can learn, detrimental behaviors while incarcerated, and there are adverse impacts on mental wellness. So one of the biggest changes you see is when somebody is sent into restorative justice diversion, as opposed to standard criminal justice processing, the rate of recidivism is much, much lower. I'll also note that formal criminal justice processing of juveniles, especially for discretionary arrests and relatively minor charges like disorderly conduct, is known to be extremely counterproductive. This is something where there's no longer any academic debate about it. Like back in 2010, there was a Campbell systemic review doing a meta-analysis across a whole large number of studies. And what it found was juvenile system processing, at least given experimental evidence presented in this report, does not appear to have a crime control effect. In fact, almost all of the results are negative in direction, as measured by the prevalence, incidence, severity, and self-reported outcomes. The studies that compared system processing to a diversion program reported much larger negative effects, like beneficial effects, than those compared to doing nothing. So the studies actually found that rather than arresting somebody, a juvenile, doing nothing in a, and these are randomized controlled trials, doing nothing actually resulted in long-term better outcomes, both for the juvenile and for society at large, because you actually had fewer crimes than being committed subsequently. But the effect is larger when you actually send people into these diversion programs, like restorative justice. And I'll mention one place where this is, very relevant is MPD is very predominantly arresting Black juveniles. Like 3/4 of the juveniles that get sent into, end up in the Dane County Juvenile Detention Center, end up in the criminal justice system, are Black juveniles. A Black juvenile is over 12 times more likely to be arrested for disorderly conduct than a white juvenile. MPD is rightfully proud of its diversion and deflection programs. And MPD should be lauded for what it's done with these diversion and deflection programs. At the same time, there are huge gaps. For example, for juveniles 12 to 16, municipal citations can be diverted to restorative justice programs, but criminal charges are generally not eligible for diversion. And it appears that most cases of disorderly conduct by juveniles end up getting charged as criminal code violations and aren't diverted. And that actually surprised me. I didn't expect to find that. And this negatively influences life course and will actually increase crime. And it tends to perpetuate the problem of two Madisons.
And to add on to this, what I was saying before about systemic issues needing systemic answers. This is an example of that because ultimately we're not going to be able to do anything like within the city of Madison about the national culture, the statewide laws, or the county rules that were inherently shaped by a system that is unfair. So what we can do though is we can answer how we're going to respond to that system. Diversionary restorative justice programs allow us to have that other option rather than following along with a system lockstep that we don't agree with. We find solutions to the same problem that we can do here within Madison, so that we're not dependent entirely upon the capital to solve our problems for us. We look after each other and we can find our own solutions within our city. Now on to the next one, or do we want to take a break?
Oh, yes.
I'm just wondering, like, does the Madison Police Department have like a policy about when they'll take a disorderly conduct charge by against a juvenile, like as a criminal charge? I guess it seems like there's two directions they can go.
Yep.
Municipal citation versus criminal, and I'm just wondering, like, what?
There is a policy. It's at the discretion of the arresting officer.
Okay.
So the arresting officer, like it looks like, in a very substantial proportion of the cases, it does get, the officer decides, okay, I'll make the citation. If it's a citation and it's a juvenile in the age range of 12 to 16, then that then can get diverted, and most of those such cases get diverted. If the officer decides in contrast, okay, I'm going to make this a criminal charge, then that goes to the DA's office and basically is not subject to diversion. If the kid is 17 years old, they're not eligible for this type of citation diversion. So that's one example of a gap. If they're 17 years old and get a criminal charge and it goes to Ozan's office, then potentially they could be sent to community restorative court, but only a relatively small fraction do get sent. So currently, all these kids, many kids are getting sent into the juvenile justice system in a way that we know from a lot of studies, a lot of good quality studies, is called counterproductive for them and for us.
To expand on that a little bit as well, so while the decision is always it's at the discretion of the officer that's there at the scene, there is also a trickle-down effect that comes from the chief's office in these kind of questions. For example, I know that very early on when I started, I had a meeting with then Chief Barnes, and we were discussing specifically traffic stops and the citations that come from there. And he had issued guidance that had come down from that as far as whether or not you're stopping somebody over like a fix-it ticket, as we call it, like the your taillights out kind of thing. Essentially, the procedure on there, it's like, do you need to stop them for this, or are they actually presenting a danger? And there's that kind of cultural change can come down from the top and trickles all the way down to the rest of the rank and file. So while there is discretion that is placed in the hands of the officer, ultimately the department itself can also essentially put some weight on the scales there as well.
Like another example of that was actually Chief Koval. I've forgotten what he called it. It may have been something like best possible resolution, but he wrote up something where he encouraged officers to find the best possible resolution, which may not be arrest or may not be arrest and criminal charge. We're going to start again, and we're in recommendations, and there were 7 recommendations, and the next recommendation is dynamic speed bumps. And this is actually something that most people have not heard of. The recommendation is that the city of Madison explore the feasibility of using dynamic speed bumps, for example, active bump, to slow speeding traffic in lieu of speed enforcement cameras, which are illegal in Wisconsin, have disparate racial impacts, and impact the poor most heavily. And this is in the spirit of problem-oriented policing. Like, remember, problem-oriented policing tries to use less in the way of standard enforcement. So, like, the standard mechanism is you enforce, you have fines. If somebody is poor, they're going to have more difficulty paying such a fine. This is actually a mechanism where you have plates installed in the road, and when a car speeds, the plate, at least in the active bump system, depresses, producing a sharp bump. If you have emergency vehicles, like ambulances and stuff, they carry transponders. This doesn't happen. Standard traffic that isn't speeding is not going to experience a bump. This was developed, the active bump system was actually first developed in Sweden, and it's now been deployed in a number of countries, Sweden, Iceland, Australia. It's perfectly compatible with a lot of snow, winter conditions, and it really presents a potential solution, especially for corridors like East Wash, where you have a lot of speeding, you have a lot of complaints about the speeding, you have a lot of injuries that occur as a consequence of it. So it would be a way to do traffic calming on these large streets where a standard speed bump would not be feasible. And it gets around the problem that Madison can't legally implement speed enforcement cameras. And in part, I was motivated to begin looking into this when our mayor Satya articulated that, hey, maybe we should lobby for speed enforcement, to make speed enforcement cameras legal in Wisconsin. And I thought, well, is there an alternative solution to this? And this provides a potential alternative solution. Now, I'll note that the recommendation is for the city just to explore the feasibility of it. It may be that engineering will look into it and conclude, well, maybe this is too expensive. Though the expense appears to be no more, based on the data that I've gotten so far, it appears to be in the long run no more expensive than a speed enforcement camera.
To add on to that, the most notable difference though between a dynamic speed bump and traffic enforcement cameras is the cost to the taxpayer themselves. Not just in the installment of these, but in the day-to-day operation of them. Running over a bump isn't going to charge you $100, and $100 that could have gone towards paying rent. These are the ways that that further enforcement of the laws actually have a disparate impact on the poor, because our laws so often are tied to a financial penalty for the violation of said laws. So it's really only just a fine for those that are more wealthy, but for those that are less wealthy, this can be a life-changing event, as opposed to a bump. So there's always going to be these little simple solutions that we can explore that actually solve the problem that we're looking at, and on a systemic basis. And one of those that I believe is going to be coming up here in the second half of this year is specifically in police foot pursuits. A man died in MPD custody earlier this year. His name was Richard Johnson. And currently this investigation is being handled by the DOJ, DCI. At the moment, our office is not doing anything about this investigation until that investigation is concluded. But this is a good point to start talking about foot pursuits. Now, foot pursuits are among the most hazardous of police interactions for both the officer as well as the person that they're pursuing. And if you want to have an idea as to why, I'm going to be speeding through this a little bit just so we have time for the data analysis items at the end here. But if you want a general, quick, and easy understanding of why foot pursuits are dangerous, I want you to imagine trying to sprint 50 yards and then thread a needle. That's what we are asking officers to do when they are in the middle of a foot pursuit, high adrenaline, they're chasing after someone, they're expending a lot of energy to catch up to someone, and then now follow all of your training and procedures and all the things that you have gone for hours of training for in the next 5 seconds. That's why a foot pursuit is dangerous. It requires a frankly very difficult mental shift to occur between just raw physical I am sprinting to now I am considering all factors, everything that's happening around me. When in these foot pursuits, the perspective of the officers becomes tunnel vision. They're focused on like trying to capture, to catch up to the person that they're pursuing. And as a result of that, they may miss other items around them. The other bystanders nearby, environmental hazards that may impact the decentralization of the subject. And that's why when it comes to our recommendation, we're looking towards having the no hands-on recommendation in particular. That is that the person that's pursuing the subject is not the one that is going to be like then tackling them and doing all the use of force. Instead, they're maintaining line of sight so that they can be reporting to their backup as far as like where the person is going. Things like this, where in trying to differentiate or to draw a wedge between the pursuing law enforcement and the subject always leads to less use of force for obvious reasons. Ultimately, a person is going to stop running eventually. And if we can maintain a line of sight on them, then we're going to be, MPD is going to be able to take them into custody safely. And that's the main thing, is that we're trying to take some of the onus of that impossible task of sprinting really fast and then threading a needle off of the hands of the officers, and therefore make their job safer as well as our lives safer. So that's where we're going with that recommendation, but I want to skip ahead a little bit to get to the wearing of masks in public. For transparency's sake, I'm skipping past a recommendation that is also noting that the MPD continues and intensifies its effort to diversify the Madison Police Department, especially with the hiring of Black and women officers. So, for protection of wearing masks in public, this is a issue that I foresee is going to be popping up in discussions as the summer comes around. People are politically active, they're more likely to go out to protest than do marches in the summer when the weather is nice. And this is, I'm trying to find the politically neutral way to say this, but it's been a culture war issue for a flashpoint for the past several months, or years, I should say. And in particular, there's been a push amongst law enforcement to criminalize the use of masks at these protests so that people can be identified easier. This is a huge problem on several different levels. First and foremost, let's talk about people with disabilities. If a person with an immunocompromised person wants to go to a protest, but if in doing so and wearing any kind of facial covering that they may need subjects them to increased police scrutiny, that's a violation of their First Amendment rights. And so first and foremost, I want to center the disabled in this discussion. Before we start talking about facial recognition software and the right to anonymity, I think that is a population that is often ignored in this discussion, and I really, really want to focus that the right to wear a mask to a protest has to be protected, if only on the medical reasoning for those are disabled neighbors. Next, as far as the right to anonymity, we already have seen what can happen if your identity is revealed at a protest that captures the ire of a particular federal administration. As a result of that, the president truthed, I'm not sure what the verb is for this, it's a tweet. He essentially called for there to be no masks. It was very, pardon the pun, mask off in the intention behind this and who this is targeting. This is against people exercising their First Amendment protesting rights. So what our recommendation is to clarify MPD's demonstrations and assemblies standard operating procedure to detail like what the actual process and scrutiny that a person would fall under if they're wearing a mask. Namely, that if there has to be a reasonable suspicion that the person is committing or is about to commit a crime in order for them to have to identify themselves to the officer, i.e. in order to remove their mask. And even then, that the mask can then be put back on. As far as any kind of blanket ban on wearing a mask in public, this is inherently unconstitutional and will only put the community in danger as well as threaten the trust that MPD is trying to gain. So, moving from there, I also wanted to touch on the Lincoln-Riley Act. This is one of the first bills that are first laws that Trump signed. Essentially, the long and short of this is that it allows for even the most minor of things that are being listed as for the purpose of an arrest, shoplifting, for example, can be utilized, or ICE can utilize this act to then take a person under custody for such a small act. I want to specify, it's not necessarily in the slideshow here, but MPD has in two separate locations its interactions and its relationship with ICE. First, in its Code of Conduct, Section 8, it details that the point or the thrust of MPD's perspective on working with ICE is that it wants to first and foremost allow that anyone feels safe to come into the police department to report an incident. And that can't be done if there is a concern that if they talk to the police department, that ICE might come and get them. And as the due process rights around ICE detentions deteriorate and the reasons for ICE detentions become more and more sulfurious, this is really important, is to maintain that public trust within our institutions. The public may not trust ICE, but they should be able to trust MPD. So that's what Section 8 of the Code of Conduct is touching on. Then they have a separate standard operating procedure. It's titled Enforcement of Immigration Acts, or Enforcement of Immigration. Details the 4 different areas in which they will talk to ICE. And I just want to kind of go over those real fast because it ties in with the effects of the Lincoln-Riley Act. So those 4 circumstances are: 1, the individual is engaged in or is suspected of terrorism or espionage. 2, the individual is reasonably suspected of participating in a criminal street gang. 3, the individual is arrested for any violent felony. Or 4, the individual is a previously deported felon under circumstances for which there is an independent basis for officers to detain or arrest the individual. Now, these 4 circumstances are, as you might have noticed just from that quick reading, pretty vague. And generally this has been left up to the discretion of MPD. Currently, the Police Civilian Oversight Board has been taking this up as a topic of interest, and the Office of the Independent Auditor is as well. Specifically, we're interested to hear from the community as far as like what their expectations are as far as when the police department works with ICE, under what circumstances, and what the public's understanding of these 4 circumstances might be. So I would really like to encourage everyone that is hearing this and is feeling confused, is feeling frustrated, or is just generally not getting an answer, to please reach out to the office, to please reach out to the PCOB, because we need your support as we try and get set answers and set something in place that everyone is confident in. Go ahead.
Adding just a few little things. As many people here might be aware, the Trump administration has accused people who protest around Gaza of supporting or engaging in terrorism. So that of course relates to that one MPD criteria. You've also had many people accused of gang activity simply because they have a tattoo. Like one of the people who was sent down to imprisonment in El Salvador clearly was not involved in gang activity at all, but had a sibling who had autism, had an autism awareness tattoo, and that subjected the individual to being sent to El Salvador.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll also add, the Lake and Riley Act doesn't just impose this on people who are fully undocumented. Asylees, people who have been granted asylum, are also subject to it. People who are DACA recipients, anybody who falls in the what's called the uninspected category. So it's not just undocumented individuals. And shoplifting, burglary, theft, or larceny, they don't have to be convicted of it. They just have to be arrested or charged, or admission of having committed the essential elements of the act. So for a minor offense, or potentially even no offense, but where somebody is said, I think this person shoplifted, they can end up with mandatory detention, deportation, and I don't think that Madison as a community really wants that. So that's why we've issued this recommendation that officers look at the potential suitability of an alternative resolution rather than arrest for individuals in this circumstance, and they should consider the potential detrimental implications of statements recorded in case reports.
Yeah, so tying back to the same discussion we were having over restorative justice diversion programs, ultimately here's that system that I was talking about, that outside system that Madison has the choice of how we're going to respond to. And we can make our own policies, we can clarify our own policies, we can boil down exactly what it is, where our line is that we're not going to cross. And that's what our recommendation really ties into here, is that we think that at this point, MPD and the community of Madison really needs to sit down in a conversation of how we're going to actually engage with the federal police right now, considering what is happening, what ICE is being used for, and its expansion. So with that said, that concludes the recommendations. Moving on to data analysis. This is going to be Greg's baby here as we go through some of the different database investigations. So whereas I do individual investigations into individual incidents brought by individuals, this is the policy and practice analysis. Then Greg is going to be giving us a better look of the department as a whole, rather than in the individual instance. So, right?
And also, before I enter into that, if anybody has any questions on those last set of slides.
I'm just wondering, how is ICE cooperation and from the MPD actually operationalized? I noticed the recommendation mentioned you should really consider possible consequences of case reports. What access to data does ICE get routinely, or how is the communication? Is that transparent? Is that publicly available? Just how that works?
Yes and no. So the good news is that is transparent, and it is basically MPD is not cooperating with ICE at all. In order to do so, they would have this specific type of agreement that you might have heard that certain counties around us have been signing on to with ICE. Dane County does not have such an agreement with ICE. MPD does not have such an agreement with ICE. And as a result of that, the information that's tied into like their systems are not being shared with ICE automatically. However, if ICE were to take somebody into custody, they do have access to their criminal history. And that can include some of the items that would fall under the Lincoln Riley Act.
Thanks.
Yeah, like ICE, okay, once somebody is arrested and ends up in, say, Dane County Jail, that's public information, you know, what they're charged with. Also, case records can be obtained under open records or through subpoena. So these all have implications downstream.
Yeah, there's always a ton of different ways that they can seek out the information, but as far as like the actual practical access to it, immediate access to it, like that's really coming from these agreements that other agencies are entering into with ICE. Any other questions?
Yes.
This might be a bridge between where we just were and where we're going. Much like for the PFC, you have to have standing in order to appear. Are there certain things that the Office of the Independent Monitor is going to need to see either in an intake or in a complaint that would lend itself more favorably to that then becoming a recommendation? Is it, we need to see it above 50% of the time, or is it perhaps it's egregious enough and it pushes policy, or have you seen any maybe identifiable trends that have led more so to those recommendations coming out of your office?
I think ultimately it's really going to be a case-by-case basis as far as like, you know, whether or not this can lead to a recommendation or whether or not this is a case study in a systemic issue that like a recommendation can address. For example, if it's a, you know, entirely localized incident that's between one person and another person, there's some interpersonal misunderstanding there and the force of policy is used against that person, that's not necessarily something that a policy recommendation is going to change, because then we're adding caveats to these SOPs based off of every single cop's imagination, you know? Where that comes in, or the next recommendation there is also the office can recommend increased training and changes in training. So essentially, in situations like that, where we may not like have a overarching policy change recommendation, we can make recommendations as far as like ways that MPD officers are trained and the things that they're trained in. So to try and address those kinds of less widespread issues. But also I really want to stress that this is not a purely scientific system. You know, there's always going to be these factors that would lead someone to not come into the office, and as a result their voice is not heard, and therefore I can't really say with any kind of definitive nature like, all right, this is making up a majority of people's experiences with MPD. And even if it isn't, I mean, I think that a lot of us are here and a lot of us have been following this because we recognize that it's what the state does to the least of us that matters the most. And it's about protecting, you know, the people that make up that 1% that are experiencing a disproportionate amount of use of force, for example. So,
Thank you for helping me understand.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, in a case, I don't know if this was answered in jurisdiction, but in say the situation with Kevin Price, who the Fitchburg police responded to, but then he was then brought to a hospital in Madison, where undoubtedly there were, you know, Madison EMTs, possibly a Madison police officer at the hospital, and DCI possibly at that point, I don't know. But his next of kin was never contacted, his power of attorney was not contacted, and so he remained in a hospital that was probably the worst for his type of trauma, without someone there to be able to make decisions for him, and he wasn't able to make those decisions for himself. So he was there for 3 days, essentially dying without any family even knowing he was there. in a situation like that where you don't have Madison police directly involved giving orders, can you make a recommendation to prevent that from happening to a Madison resident or from in a Madison type incident, so that if the officers, were involved and they're transported to the hospital, that they must contact next of kin or a power of attorney, mental health care worker, somebody?
That's an excellent question, and I'm happy to say yes. There are several other people within the city of Madison that have similar goals, or at the very least that we share, our goals and can work together for that. One of which would be the Office of Violence Prevention within the Department of Public Health, as well as the department, the fire department, and just generally, we're within the Department of Public Health actually, as far as our budgetary discussions. Not necessarily we're a separate department, but it's generally we're looked at as in part of the same cohort, because violence is a subject of the public health, and you're right, there's various different agencies and hands that are involved in procedures throughout the city. So our recommendations don't have to be just limited specifically to the police department. For example, the Actabone recommendation.
Right, yeah.
We can make larger recommendations that bring in more city resources and more eyes towards a subject that we think that more assistance can be done on.
Thank you.
So moving on to data analysis. The one analysis that's completed and in this report is on use of force allegation sustain rate. So back in 2013 or so, MPD released data on excessive force complaints filed in 2008 through 2012, and what the disposition was, and it showed a comparatively low sustain rate for use of force complaints. And this was released in response to a records request by a journalist. Only 1 out of 108 use of force complaints, about 1%, filed in those years was sustained by MPD. That sustain rate is 8.6 times lower than the national average. And some of the not sustained or exonerated findings appeared inconsistent with community expectations. So I've got a few examples here where the community appeared to have a different view than MPD. One was the Janelle Laird case, and even Mayor Soglin said, "Oh, this is inappropriate." The Block community was pretty much universal in feeling that the handling of this, the use of force, was excessive. You had the Jacob Bauer case, where there was a settlement, and Steve Heimsness in that case then later went on to shoot and kill Paul Heenan. Ashley DiPiazza, which was a little bit later, but Ashley DiPiazza, a jury said, okay, this use of force was not reasonable, but yet it was exonerated by MPD. So I wanted to know, okay, between then and now, have things changed? Has this changed? So I obtained data on use of force allegations investigated by PSNIA for investigations from 2017 to the present. And in this period, MPD sustained, again, about 1%. Not much different than the earlier period. And even if you look at the most recent years, you don't really see any difference. Rather than merely comparing MPD's sustain rate to the national average, including departments with very different characteristics, I wish to examine how MPD's sustain rate would compare to departments with similar characteristics. So I used data from the LEMAS, Law Enforcement Management and Administrative Statistics dataset. It includes a very rich set of variables for each department, so you could look at what correlates and what you might expect for a department with MPD's characteristics. And like variables that clearly were predictive of the rate of the rate of the excessive force complaint sustain rate, include percentage of black officers in the department, the extent to which the department practiced community policing, hours of field training required for new officers, whether the department used computer-aided dispatch on a regular basis. So a set of variables was highly predictive of across the departments in the US of the sustain rate. The predicted use of force allegation sustain rate for a department with MPD's characteristics, I found it to be 8.99%, again, far above Madison's actual rate. And I'll also mention that the rate at which people complain, about use of force, make formal complaints, in Madison's case is actually very comparable to other departments that have a much higher sustain rate. So the question, has this changed? And apparently not. A caveat and potential options. I'll mention, however, municipal police departments show extreme variation in use of force allegation sustain rates. In the LEMAS data set, 39% of the probability mass of the distribution of use of force allegation sustain rates fell at or below the level of MPD, representing departments with comparably low sustain rates. So a large proportion of departments sustain at low rates, even though there are many departments that sustain at much higher rates. I tend to think that this may actually be tied to the lack of specificity and room for subjective interpretation in the Graham v. Connor standard that governs law enforcement use of force. It is a very vague standard, and different departments may be interpreting it in quite different ways. One option that we're considering to facilitate potential policy adjustment to gain a clear picture is an audit of PSNI files alleging excessive force to identify any patterns of method or conclusions that seem at odds with the public's understanding of use of force policy. And as patterns emerge, we potentially could contract with contractors with sufficient experience working in internal affairs divisions and comparable law enforcement agencies with higher sustain rates, so that they could look at these case records and investigations and potentially help determine whether there are any policies or practices that could be improved. So that's something that we potentially may consider in the future.
If you wouldn't mind me just jumping on.
Mm-hmm.
So way back at the beginning of the presentation, remember the 6 and the 9 guy, the soup and the sandwich? This is a perfect example of that. So what we have here is the most glaring example of the disconnect between the public's understanding of police procedure and policy and best practices and the actual policies and procedures and established best practices. So what we're trying to do here is not necessarily to go back and relitigate past complaints. That's not what we're interested in doing. What this option that we're considering as far as auditing past PSNIA investigations is to look to see where exactly the use of force policies that are being tapped in these investigations are changing along the ways of the incidents themselves. So for example, are these incidents leading to any changes to the policy? If they are leading to changes to the policy, are those changes effective? That's the thrust of this goal. I just want to put that out at the forefront, that the goal of the office overall is not necessarily to relitigate past complaints. Mm-hmm. It's to find these solutions so that we see less complaints in the future. Go ahead.
One question that I had when reading this, thinking about how officers who work in PSIA are obviously under pressure. You know, if you're somebody within that department whose investigations often lead to sustained complaints, you're probably going to be made pretty uncomfortable in your job at some point. And it may even impact your ability to climb the ladder. So what I'm wondering is if there's some kind of like behind the scenes, behind the blue wall, a complaint comes through, it looks valid, it's not sustained, but there's a conversation that's had with the officer about this looks pretty legit, however, we're not gonna put it on your record, but change this piece. Or if you're having trouble or you're being pushed to the edge, you need to do something to change. Is that going on? And I'm just curious about it, and this is not an endorsement of that sort of thing, because what I'm seeing is that the numbers aren't changing a whole lot in terms of racial disparities in policing. So, and in other ways as well. So would that be effective? I don't know if there's any, but I'm curious if that exists to avoid putting it on people's records, and also for those who have the responsibility of making those decisions to avoid a no confidence vote, like pissing off the union, and to avoid upsetting people because you just found your colleague in the wrong and it's going to make their life more difficult, it's embarrassing, they're on record now. So I'm curious about that, like if there's that.
So, two things. First, actually, there's an answer to this that's later in the PowerPoint as far as when we're touching on the early intervention system. And that's basically what is inexistent right now, I think is the closest thing to an answer to your question.
Okay.
We'll touch on that a little bit more when we get to it. But aside from that, as far as I think what you're asking is is there a line of communication that's happening between PSNIA and the chief as far as the threats that they might be coming under as far as the integrity of their investigations?
Well, what I'm talking about more is similar to an officer pulling up, seeing two kids fight. They don't write it down. They don't take their names. They tell them to knock it off. And I see what you're doing. I'm not putting you in the system, because we know that happens. We know officers use their discretion to not put people in the system or put them in the system. And so officers doing that for each other as well. So through a PSIA, that looked valid. However, I'm gonna let this slide. You're not even getting a warning, but watch yourself, or do you need help? Are you stretched thin? Is something going on? Is that going on to avoid putting, having record of somebody actually violating a policy?
If there was, well, that's the thing. So MPD has within its disciplinary structure a safeguard against that happening, in that the chief makes the final decision. The chief can overrule PSNIA. If PSNIA says the complaint is without merit, the chief can still move forward with disciplinary actions to be brought to the PFC.
Okay.
So as far as the one deciding voice, it really is the chief there, because the chief can also take a PSNIA investigation and says, no, we did find wrongdoing, and the chief can decide not to bring disciplinary action. So a lot of that really kind of comes to a head at the head of the department.
And we see what happened with Chief Flynn in the Don Trey Hamilton case.
Yes.
When he did that, no confidence vote, practically ran out of the department, which is it, so I'm curious, which is all part of this reality. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I gotta go. I thought it was done at 3 and I have another appointment, but could I just ask one thing? And if it's a long answer, you can get back to me on it, or
Okay.
I'd just like to know, when you're looking at the variables of, our sustained rate versus other departments, did you take body cameras, those departments that use body cameras as a variable? Because I would think.
I think that was one of the variables, and it wasn't, if I remember correctly, it wasn't predictive.
Okay. All right, well, thanks for this.
But
Good to
that's
hear.
actually a very good question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I got to sneak out.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks, Bonnie. That was all I had to add. If you wanted to move on. I think the next thing we have is the GIS.
Oh, and I didn't actually, did I show this? I may not have shown this slide.
No.
Yeah, this is the slide that I was talking about at the end, that there is extreme variation between departments. And what we're considering as options to try to address. And again, as Robin just said, the point is not to relitigate the past cases. The point is to understand what occurred and what can be beneficially modified going forward. So there are other data analyses that are ongoing. And one of these I'm going to talk about. We have a collaboration going with data scientists at UCLA, and specifically M. Keith Chen and others. And this is to use smartphone data to try to understand where MPD officers are spending their time. And the point is, especially to understand if this may be impacting the racial disparities. So in the study shown here, the abstract, they talk about using GIS smartphone data, and you've got pings off of the smartphones. You can use that to track where officers spend their time and whether they're spending their time disproportionately in, say, in predominantly Black neighborhoods in a way that doesn't correlate with socioeconomics or crime-driven demand for police services. And what they found is, yes, that is what they found when looking across multiple large American cities. And they found that it explained 57% of the higher arrest rate in more Black neighborhoods. In other words, police were spending more time in predominantly Black neighborhoods, even though that actually did not necessarily make sense in terms of allocation of time based on socioeconomics or crime. And because they were spending more time in those neighborhoods, there were more arrests occurring in those neighborhoods. So for GIS analysis of anonymized smartphone data, this data, the smartphone data is fully anonymized and then packaged and sold by data vendors. And you can look for phones where the pings show that the phones are showing up within the geofence boundaries of police stations at shift change or roll call. And you can infer, okay, these phones are the phones of police officers. And then you can track where those phones are showing up throughout the day. And in most large US cities, police spend more time in Black neighborhoods. So you can see in this graphic, time spent in Black versus white neighborhoods. And across the 21 cities examined in that study, the racial ethnic composition helped explain the police presence beyond the explanatory power of socioeconomics and crime-driven demand for police services. So the hope is that this will be extended now to Madison, the study. The collaborators we're working with are pretty overcommitted. They've told us that they have a target time of June for getting the results back to us, but no guarantee because they are quite overcommitted. Another analysis that is ongoing, I'm obtaining data to do a threshold test on traffic stop data. So this is a kind of test that combines information on both search rates. It can be applied to stop and frisk of individuals. It could be applied to vehicles. We're applying it to vehicles, as well as hit rates, the rate at which, when a search is done, contraband is found. By contraband, I mean, for example, drugs, weapons, etc. And the test allows one to directly infer the standard of evidence officers require before carrying out the search. And the finding in most municipalities is that police require less suspicion to search Black and Hispanic drivers than white drivers. And the double standard is evidence of discrimination. And in the graphic you see here from the Stanford Open Policing Project, each of those circles essentially corresponds to a different municipality. And you'll see that those circles for both Black and Hispanic are disproportionately falling below that diagonal line that represents what you would expect if the rate matched that of stopping, white drivers. At this point, I've got a month of MPD traffic stop data. Now I wanted to first analyze that and get a sense of that before asking for more data. I'm going to, analyze ultimately 2 to 3 years of data, but from the month of data, there are a number of tentative conclusions that I can see in the data. Even though there's not enough data yet to perform this threshold test. There are, not unexpectedly, large racial disparities in MPD traffic stops. Black drivers get very disproportionately stopped for non-moving violations, like tinted windows or vehicle registration, and especially at night. The racial disparities in stops are the highest during night hours. And that same pattern is seen in a lot of other municipal police departments. There are quite a lot of traffic stops where no report is taken and no reason is given for the stop. And if you look at the location, because there's location data, they tend to occur more often in census blocks with a higher proportion of Black residents. The racial disparities for traffic stops are higher for citations and for traffic stops than what you see after traffic accidents. So in other words, with accidents, it sort of gives you a normalizing factor of what you might expect, but then when you look at traffic stops, the disparity is higher. In traffic stops, Black drivers receive more citations relative to warnings than white drivers, and disparities appear to track the race of the driver, Black versus white, and not car value. But it was interested in car value as a proxy for socioeconomic or class status. So those are tentative conclusions that I've drawn from the month of data and I've analyzed so far, but ultimately I'm going to be analyzing 3 years of data, and I hope to employ this threshold test that I've described. Any questions?
Just want to make sure I understand.
Yes.
You're saying there are recorded records of we pulled this person over, but they don't have a reason. There are lots of those?
There are quite a lot of those.
Oh.
Yeah. We pulled this person over. Here's the location we pulled the person over.
Uh-huh.
And there is nothing about the reason for why the person was pulled over or any other information.
Yeah, to expand on this, we're working with MPD's data team right now on trying to essentially find a streamlined kind of monitoring system that we can utilize, and part of that involves a lot of work with their data team as far as what the limitations are of their databases, where they're tracking, which what things can be beefed up, what things need to be added.
Right, because conceivably they didn't put a reason because none of them applied, but maybe there was a reason. Maybe it was a drop-down menu and it just.
The thing about police records that I can tell you with absolute certainty is that no two are the same. It's just a very,
Okay.
Ultimately officers, come across all kinds of different incidents, all kinds of different kind of situations, and it's impossible to kind of anticipate it ahead of time, every single aspect to it. So as a result, it is a constantly fluid and evolving method of data collection.
Interesting. Okay.
And another targeted data analysis And this analysis is actually completed at this point, but it was completed after the report came out. Early intervention systems. So early intervention systems flag officers at high risk of adverse events, allowing intervention with the officers to try to avoid adverse events or tragedies, for example, avoidable officer-involved deaths. The interventions could involve supplementary training. They could involve officer mental wellness assistance. And NPD PS&I staff provided us with a tutorial on its current EIS approach. And they're using EI Pro software. And it tracks a number of appropriate indicators. And they're tracking those indicators with a time window of a year. And I'm glad they're doing that because many departments inappropriately use a much shorter time window. One indicator used by MPD is the total number of complaints to PS&IA. And some police departments only use sustained complaints, which provide much less information and much less predictive accuracy for adverse events. EI Pro allows real-time tracking, and it has a very friendly user interface. And MPD supervisory officers track indicators for officers beneath them on an ongoing basis and perform periodic check-ins with supervised officers. So there are a lot of things that MPD is doing with its EIS that are appropriate, that are beneficial.
Also, this works towards answering your earlier question, Amelia, as far as so complaints are coming in, IA is finding one way. If they're consistently finding one way or the other, though, does that still have any kind of impact if there's no discipline coming down? So this is where the EIS is supposed to come in as well, is to provide that kind of dashboard alert of like saying, hey, this person seems to be running into this incident a lot.
When was this when was this started? I know that Chief Ray, after some of his parting words were, we used to have this and we stopped using it, some sort of flagging system. And this looks a little bit more involved in that. Did it start with COBOL? Do you know who started it?
Actually, it was a consequence of the OIR.
Okay.
Yeah. Up to that point, there had been no EIS. OIR said, you need an EIS. So MPD then got the IA Pro system with the EI Pro EIS element.
What's OER?
OIR is a consulting group that was brought in to do a comprehensive review of MPD. And they issued a whole set of recommendations. And then those went to the MPD Policy Procedure Review Committee, which added some recommendations and reaffirmed all of OIR's recommendations.
And OIR collected recommendations throughout this, from like sort of human services groups throughout the city as well. So people who interact with folks who are compromised in some kind of,
Interact with
some
them.
kind of way, interact with the police a lot, offered recommendations too, so, yeah.
Yeah, like OIR did an excellent job.
They did.
So, with early intervention system, a downside of MPD's current system is that it's very simplistic, using individual indicators. These indicators are considered by supervisors on a case-by-case basis rather than a uniform procedure. And we reaffirm the ad hoc committee's recommendation that MPD should ultimately deploy a machine learning EIS system like that of Benchmark Analytics. And I've got some information here on their system. It's based on a system that was developed at the University of Chicago by the Data Science for Social Good program. A machine learning system can target officers in need of assistance more accurately. So it's taking a large set of variables and pulling together in a way that's predictive, that can be much more predictive than, say, looking at an individual variable. And Benchmark Analytics states that for the 5% of officers scored by its EIS as having the highest risk of misconduct in the next year, on average, 85% are true positives. That's a very high true positive rate. The system flagging 20 to 40% of all true positives. So the system only flags, say, a third of the true positives, but of the ones it identifies, the vast majority actually are, it's accurate. Vast majority do go on to commit misconduct the following year. Until such a machine learning system is operational, ranking all officers in the total number of PS&I cases over the last 2 years with a threshold of the top 5% should provide useful predictive accuracy. It's not going to be anywhere near as good as the machine learning system, but it actually does, it's been shown to provide pretty substantial predictive accuracy. So we're going to be including that in a recommendation that we're going to be giving to MPD. But the hope is that ultimately such a machine learning system, either the benchmark analytics system or a homemade one, will be deployed here.
Any other questions? If not, just want to make sure that we extend our sincerest thank you to MPD's data team and their records section, especially Daniel Howder and Assistant Chiefs Angela Kamoske, as well as Paige Valenta. She should be on here, but yeah, Assistant Chief Valenta has also been personally a huge help to me. She was previously like the overseeing PSNIA, so until the recent administrative changeover. But yeah, so I just wanted to give a shout out to her as well, as well as Acting Chief John Patterson and former Alder Marshall Rummel and current Alder Sabrina Madison.
Yeah, those two alders sponsored an amendment to the budget that allowed me to continue into this year. Without that, I would not be here. So great appreciation to both of them.
Is there any questions that, as we conclude here? If not, thank you all so much for coming. I know that we ran a bit long, but we're also always available if you have questions in the future. Feel free to send us an email, drop by. We're in room 501 of the City County building. That's right next door to the Common Council's office. We don't have one of those hanging signs. I got another sign that's set up in the hallway, so you should be able to find us now. But we're all the way at the end of the hallway, right past the Common Council's office. Please come visit.